Get rid of that baby or I'll destroy your family, the millionaire ex warned. But years later. The private office overlooked the Boston skyline, a cathedral of glass and money where empires were built and lives were shattered with equal indifference. Joan Hill stood near the door, her midnight blue dress catching the light from 1,000 windows stretching toward the harbor. 8 years of silence hung between them like a wall neither knew how to breach. Paul Howard turned from the window, his face older now, carved with lines that hadn't existed when she'd known him. When she'd loved him. When he'd destroyed her. "Joan," he said, and her name in his mouth still felt like a wound reopening. "You have 5 minutes," she replied, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Say whatever you dragged me across the country to hear, and then I'm gone. I'm dying." The words landed like stones in still water. Joan felt her composure crack at the edges, felt something she refused to name stirring beneath 8 years of carefully constructed armor. "That's not my problem anymore, Paul. You made sure of that when you told me to get rid of our baby or you'd destroy my family." Paul closed his eyes, absorbing the blow he deserved. "I know. God, Joan, I know. And I've spent every day since then wishing I could take it back. Wishing I'd been the man you needed instead of the coward I was. You threatened my parents. My sister. You said you'd drag us through court until we had nothing left. You looked me in the eyes and told me our child was an inconvenience you'd erase from existence. And I was wrong. I was terrified and selfish and completely, utterly wrong." Joan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Wrong? That's what you call it? I spent 3 months of my pregnancy afraid to sleep because I thought you'd make good on your threats. I moved across the country with nothing but a suitcase and $300. I started over from zero because the man I loved became the monster I had to escape." Paul's voice cracked. "The baby. Did you?" "I kept him." Joan watched Paul's face collapse with the weight of revelation. "His name is Kevin. He's 7 years old. He has your eyes, your stubborn jaw, your way of asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. And he's never known his father because I had to protect him from you." Paul sank into a chair like his legs had simply stopped working. "I have a son. I have a son and I never knew." "No." Joan stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. "I have a son. You have a child you tried to erase before he drew his first breath. And the only reason I'm telling you now is because if you're dying, and you want to make peace with your past, you should understand the full scope of what you threw away." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that couldn't be unsaid. "Can I see him?" Paul whispered. "Not as a father. I know I have no right to that. Just to see the person he's become. The person you raised without me. Why would I let you anywhere near my child? Because he deserves to know where he came from." Paul looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something she'd never expected to see in his eyes. Genuine humility. "Not who I was, Joan. Who I am now. Who I've spent 8 years trying to become because of what I did to you. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is just another story about a rich man who hurt a woman and now wants forgiveness he doesn't deserve. But I need you to stay with me here, because this story isn't about whether Paul Howard deserves a second chance. This story is about what happens when the monster from your worst nightmare turns out to be just a broken human being. It's about whether walls protect us or imprison us. It's about a little boy who asks the kind of questions that change everything. If you've ever built walls around your heart to keep yourself safe, if you've ever wondered whether people can truly change or whether forgiveness makes you weak or strong, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because Mr. Dawson's Stories is where we explore the messy, complicated truth about love, betrayal, and the long road to redemption. Now let me take you back to where this all began. 3 weeks before that confrontation in Boston, when a single envelope changed everything. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Seattle rain misted against Joan Hill's face as she stood at her mailbox, sorting through utility bills and charity solicitations with the efficient attention of a woman who had built an empire by never overlooking details. Her home sat on a quiet street in a good neighborhood, nothing ostentatious but solid, well-maintained, the kind of place that whispered success without screaming it. At 34, Joan had the look of someone who had fought for everything she possessed. Dark hair that fell past her shoulders in waves she rarely had time to style properly. Eyes that assessed situations with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. A posture that communicated competence and warned against underestimation. She almost missed it among the advertisements. A cream-colored envelope, heavier than the others, with embossed gold lettering that caught the gray Seattle light. Howard Technologies cordially invites you to the annual philanthropy gala celebrating a decade of innovation and community partnership. Joan's hand began to shake before her mind fully processed what she was reading. Howard Technologies. Paul Howard. The name she had spent 8 years trying to forget, trying to bury beneath accomplishments and motherhood and the relentless forward motion of a life rebuilt from rubble. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. The handwriting was familiar, each letter carved into her memory from love notes she had burned years ago. Joan, I know I have no right to ask. But please come. There's something I need to say. Paul. She should burn it. That was the sensible thing, the safe thing, the thing that the woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes would do. Burn it and forget it and continue living the life she had constructed specifically to need nothing and no one, especially not him. Mom. Kevin's voice floated through the screen door, high and curious. Is dinner almost ready? I'm starving. Joan closed her eyes, letting the sound of her son's voice anchor her to the present. 7 years old. Storm gray eyes exactly like his father's. A stubborn jaw that reminded her every single day of the man who had told her to erase his existence before he even drew his first breath. 20 minutes, sweetheart, she called back, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her chest. Finish your homework first. She heard the exaggerated groan that meant compliance was coming, that small resistance followed by acceptance that characterized so much of 7-year-old negotiation. Kevin was everything. The reason she had survived. The reason she had built a catering empire from a single food truck and relentless determination. The reason she had learned that survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about proving that the people who tried to destroy you had underestimated your capacity to rise. Joan walked inside, set the envelope on her kitchen counter, and stared at it like it might explode. Mama? Kevin appeared in the kitchen doorway, his homework apparently abandoned. You look weird. Are you okay? I'm fine, baby. Just thinking about something. Kevin studied her with that unsettling perception children sometimes possessed. Is it a bad something or a good something? I don't know yet. She made dinner. Helped Kevin with his reading assignment. Listened to his elaborate description of the space station his class was studying, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. She was present for all of it, the way she always was, but some part of her mind kept drifting back to that envelope sitting on the counter like a grenade with the pin already pulled. After Kevin was asleep, Joan sat in her home office with a glass of wine she wasn't really drinking, staring at the invitation she'd brought upstairs. The gala was 3 weeks away. Plenty of time to decline. Plenty of time to forget. But she knew she wouldn't forget. She'd spent 8 years trying to forget Paul Howard, and all she'd managed was to stuff him into a compartment she rarely opened. He was still there. He would always be there, because he was woven into the face and voice and stubborn intelligence of the child sleeping down the hall. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen, her business partner and the closest thing she had to a best friend. Saw the news about Howard Technologies expanding their corporate partnership program. Potential opportunity there. Want me to look into it? Joan stared at the message, marveling at the universe's timing. Actually, she typed back, we need to talk tomorrow. Something came up. The next morning, Joan sat across from Marcus in her company's downtown Seattle headquarters. Hills and Home Catering occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse, all exposed brick and modern fixtures, a physical testament to how far she'd come from that first food truck. Marcus studied the invitation with the careful attention he brought to everything. Paul Howard, he said slowly. The Paul Howard. You're Paul Howard. He was never mine. That was the problem. Marcus set down the invitation and looked at her with the directness that made him invaluable as a partner and occasionally uncomfortable as a friend. What does he want? I don't know. His note just says there's something he needs to tell me. And you're considering going. It wasn't a question. Marcus knew her well enough to read the conflict in her face. The Howard Technologies contract could triple our corporate catering division, she said, reaching for the practical excuse. If he's extending an olive branch, maybe I should at least hear what he has to say. Joan. Marcus leaned forward. I've known you for 6 years. I've watched you build this company from nothing while raising Kevin alone. I've seen you negotiate with vendors who tried to underpay you and clients who tried to undervalue your work. You are the most practical person I know. But right now, you're trying to convince yourself this is about business when we both know it's about something else entirely. Joan looked away, toward the window where Seattle stretched gray and wet toward the horizon. I've spent 8 years running from something, she admitted. Maybe it's time to stand still and face it. What do you think he wants to tell you? I don't know. But I keep thinking about Kevin. He started asking more questions lately. About his father, about why he doesn't have one like other kids. I've been giving him half answers because I don't know how to explain that his father threatened to destroy our family before he was even born. Marcus was quiet for a moment. And if Paul wants to be part of Kevin's life now? Then I need to see who he's become. Whether he's actually changed or whether he's still the same man who tried to erase our son from existence. I can't make that decision based on 8-year-old memories and anger I've been carrying like a tumor. When's the gala? 3 weeks. Then you have 3 weeks to prepare. To remember who you are now, not who you were when he hurt you. You're not that scared girl anymore, Joan. You're a woman who employs 89 people across 3 states. You have a net worth of $12 million. You've been featured in Forbes and Entrepreneur. Whatever he wants to say to you, you'll hear it from a position of strength. Joan nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not resolution exactly. More like the settling of someone who had made a decision they couldn't yet fully understand. I'm going, she said. I know. Marcus smiled slightly. Just promise me you'll remember that whatever happened back then, you won. You survived, you thrived, and you raised an incredible kid. He doesn't get to rewrite that history. Joan spent the next 3 weeks preparing like she was going into battle, because in some ways she was. She bought a dress the color of midnight, had her hair styled, reviewed everything she could find about Howard Technologies' recent activities. She told Kevin she was attending a business event for the weekend. Can I come? He asked, his eyes bright with hope. Kevin loved seeing her work, loved watching her transform ordinary ingredients into extraordinary experiences. He'd spent countless evenings in her company's test kitchen, perched on a stool, observing with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. Not this time, baby. But I'll bring you something special. Promise? Promise. She flew to Boston on a Friday evening, watching the city lights spread beneath her like a constellation of memories she tried to forget. 8 years ago, she had left this city on a bus, crying, alone, pregnant, and terrified. Now she was returning in first class, a success by any measure, to face the man who had almost destroyed her. The hotel was elegant, impersonal, exactly what she needed. She unpacked methodically, hung her dress, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. You are Joan Hills, she told herself. You are the woman who built an empire from nothing. You are not the girl who cried on a bathroom floor because a man told her that her child was an inconvenience. But even as she thought it, she felt the old fear stirring beneath her confidence. Some wounds never fully closed. They just learned to hide beneath scar tissue that pretended to be strength. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across faces that probably couldn't imagine what it felt like to choose between rent and groceries. Women in designer gowns and men in tailored suits circulated among tables laden with food that Joan's professional eye assessed automatically. Good presentation, slightly overcomplicated flavor profiles, probably catered by someone more interested in impressing than nourishing. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged there, because she did. Every head that turned in her direction, every speculative glance, reminded her that she had earned her place in rooms like this through work and will, not inheritance or connection. The ballroom was a symphony of wealth and influence. Massive flower arrangements anchored each corner. A jazz quartet played something sophisticated near the bar. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapes that Joan automatically catalogued as adequate but uninspired. She accepted a glass of champagne she didn't intend to drink and positioned herself near the edge of the room, watching, waiting, preparing for the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated for 3 weeks. Paul found her by the champagne fountain. She felt his presence before she saw him, that familiar electric awareness that had once felt like destiny and now felt like danger. Her spine straightened. Her grip on her champagne glass tightened. Every defense she built over 8 years snapped into place like armor clicking together. Joan. His voice was older, rougher around the edges. She turned slowly, giving herself time to compose her expression into something that revealed nothing. Paul Howard at 42 had the kind of distinguished appearance that wealth and power tended to cultivate. Silver threading through dark hair that had once been entirely black. Lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent the past 8 years actually living instead of just accumulating. A suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. He was still devastatingly handsome. Joan hated herself for noticing. Paul. She kept her voice neutral, professional. Thank you for the invitation. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I. They stood in silence for a moment, the party swirling around them while something heavy and unspoken hung between them like smoke. Joan studied his face, looking for the arrogance she remembered, the casual cruelty that had manifested when she'd threatened his carefully ordered life with something as inconvenient as a child. What she saw instead confused her. Weariness. Uncertainty. Something that looked almost like fear. Can we talk somewhere private? Paul asked. There are things I need to say that aren't meant for an audience. Joan considered refusing. She had that power now, the power to walk away, to deny him access to her time and attention. But she'd come this far. She might as well see it through. Lead the way. He guided her through the crowd, nodding at various people who tried to catch his attention, never stopping long enough for introductions. They took an elevator to the second floor, walked down a corridor lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses, and entered a private office that overlooked the Boston skyline. The door closed behind them, and suddenly they were alone in a way they hadn't been in 8 years. Now, before I continue with what happened in that room, I need to pause and speak directly to you. This is the moment where everything changes. Where truths that have been buried for 8 years are about to surface. If you're invested in Joan's journey, if you want to know whether Paul Howard has actually changed or whether he's still the same man who threatened to destroy her family, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who understands what it feels like to face the ghosts of your past. And make sure you're subscribed to Mr. Dawson's Stories because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The private office was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Boston like a postcard. Leather furniture that cost more than cars. A massive desk that proclaimed power and importance to anyone fortunate or unfortunate enough to be invited here. Paul didn't move toward the power position behind the desk. Instead, he stood by the windows, his back to the view, facing her like she was something he needed to study carefully. You've built something incredible, he said. His voice carried genuine admiration mixed with something else. Regret, perhaps. Or shame. I've followed your company's growth. I hope that's not invasive. I just needed to know you were okay. Why would you care? The words came out sharper than she intended. Paul absorbed them without flinching. Because I've spent 8 years regretting every word I said to you. Because I was a coward who didn't deserve you then, and I'm probably still a man who doesn't deserve to be in the same room with you now. Then why invite me here? Paul turned away, looking out at the city lights. His shoulders seemed to carry a weight she hadn't noticed before. Because I'm dying. The words landed like a physical blow. Joan felt the room tilt slightly, her careful composure cracking at the edges. What? Not immediately. Paul's voice was steady, practiced, like he'd said this before and learned to deliver it without breaking. I have time. But there's something wrong with my heart. Ironic, isn't it? The organ I treated like it was optional for so many years is finally demanding accountability. He turned back to face her. The doctors give me 2 years. Maybe 3 with treatment. And when they told me that, when they explained that my time had limits I couldn't negotiate or buy my way out of, I realized I couldn't leave this world without telling you the truth. Without apologizing properly for what I did. Joan didn't know what to say. She'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with him standing there looking at her with eyes that held something that looked terrifyingly like genuine sorrow. I'm sorry, she finally managed. That's terrible. It's what it is. But it made me realize that I've been living a lie. Not just about you, Joan. About everything. I built an empire and measured success in dollars and influence and the number of people who feared me. I thought achievement could substitute for living. I was wrong about that. Wrong about so many things. He moved to the window seat and sat down heavily, like standing had become too much effort. When you told me you were pregnant, he continued, I panicked. I was 34 years old, running a company my father had built, surrounded by people who expected me to be a certain kind of man. My mother had just died. My brother was threatening a hostile takeover of the company. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control, and instead of seeing you as the one person who could help me hold it together, I saw you as another thing threatening to pull me under. That doesn't excuse what you said. Joan's voice was cold. What you threatened. No. It doesn't. Nothing excuses it. Paul looked at her with an honesty that was almost painful to witness. I told you to get rid of our baby or I'd destroy your family. I meant it when I said it. I was so terrified of losing control that I was willing to hurt the person I loved most in the world just to maintain the illusion that I was still in charge. Joan felt tears threatening and blinked them back violently. She hadn't come here to cry. She'd come here to be strong. I spent the first 3 months of my pregnancy terrified, she said. I didn't tell my parents why I left because I was afraid you'd follow through on your threats. I moved across the country and started over with nothing because you made me believe that was my only choice. I know. And I will never forgive myself for that. Paul's voice broke on the last word. I've spent 8 years trying to become someone different. Someone who could deserve the forgiveness I know I'll never earn. I've been in therapy for 6 years. I've donated millions to organizations that support single mothers. I volunteer at a children's hospital every week, holding babies in the cardiac unit because somehow that felt like penance for the baby I tried to erase. He paused, visibly struggling for composure. But none of it matters, Joan. None of it changes what I did to you. I'm not telling you this to earn sympathy or forgiveness. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that I understand the magnitude of my failure. You deserve to hear me say that I was wrong, completely and absolutely wrong, and that you were right to run from me. Joan stood very still, processing. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd prepared for arrogance, for excuses, for the smooth manipulation of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. She hadn't prepared for raw, unflinching honesty. The baby, Paul said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you keep it? Or did you? He couldn't finish the sentence. Joan watched him carefully, weighing her next words. This was the moment. The revelation that would change everything. I kept him, she said finally. His name is Kevin. He's 7 years old. He has your eyes. Paul made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. His face went pale, then flushed, emotions chasing each other across his features too quickly to catalogue. I have a son, he whispered. No. Joan stepped closer, her voice precise and cold. I have a son. You have a child you tried to erase before he existed. There's a difference. Paul stood abruptly, crossed to the window, pressed his palm against the glass like he needed something solid to hold on to. 7 years, he said. He's 7 years old and I never knew. I missed everything. His first words, his first steps, his first day of school. Yes. You did. Can I see him? Paul turned to face her, his eyes wet. Not as a father. I know I have no right to that. But just to see the person he's become. The person you raised without me. Why would I let you anywhere near my child? Because he deserves to know where he came from. Paul's voice was steady despite the tears tracking down his face. Not who I was, Joan. Who I am now. Who I've spent 8 years trying to become because of what I did to you. Pretty words. Joan heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. But I've heard your pretty words before. They meant nothing when you were threatening to destroy everything I loved. You're right. And I'm not asking you to trust me tonight. I'm not asking you to forgive me ever. I'm just asking for the opportunity to prove that I've changed. However long that takes. Whatever boundaries you need to set. I'll prove myself through actions, not words. Joan studied him for a long moment. This wasn't the Paul Howard she remembered. The arrogant, controlling man who had treated her pregnancy as an inconvenience to be eliminated. This was someone else entirely. Someone broken and remade by regret. But people didn't really change. Did they? I need to think, she said finally. This is too much to process in one night. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Joan turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing. If I decide to let you into Kevin's life, even peripherally, you need to understand something. If you hurt him, if you let him down, if you disappear when things get complicated, I will never forgive you. And you'll never see either of us again. I understand. Completely. Joan left without looking back. The flight back to Seattle felt longer than usual. Joan sat in first class, staring out at the darkness interrupted occasionally by city lights below, replaying the conversation in her mind. Paul was dying. Paul had spent 8 years in therapy trying to become better. Paul wanted to know his son. Nothing about this was simple. Nothing about this fit the narrative she had constructed over years of raising Kevin alone. In that narrative, Paul was the villain, the monster, the cautionary tale about trusting men who seemed perfect until you became inconvenient. But monsters didn't break down crying in private offices. Monsters didn't volunteer at children's hospitals as penance for sins they couldn't undo. Monsters didn't look at you with genuine humility and ask for the chance to prove they had changed. Unless that was exactly what monsters wanted you to think. Joan closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to Kevin. Her beautiful, curious, stubborn son who had started asking questions she didn't know how to answer. Mom, why don't I have a dad like other kids? Mom, did my dad not want me? Mom, is there something wrong with me that made him go away? She'd answered with half-truths and deflections, telling him that sometimes grown-ups made complicated decisions, that his father hadn't been ready to be a dad, that none of it had anything to do with Kevin himself. But Kevin was smart. Too smart to accept those answers forever. Eventually, he would want the truth, and Joan had always known that truth would have to include Paul Howard. Maybe this was that moment. Maybe Paul's dying had forced a confrontation that was going to happen anyway, just sooner than she'd anticipated. Or maybe this was all an elaborate manipulation, and she was about to make the worst mistake of her life. She landed in Seattle just after midnight. Marcus met her at the airport, his familiar presence a comfort after the emotional intensity of Boston. "How did it go?" he asked once they were in his car. "Complicated." Joan stared out the window at the wet streets. "He's dying. Heart condition. 2 or 3 years, maybe." Marcus was quiet for a moment. And he wants to know Kevin. Says he's changed. Says he's spent 8 years trying to become someone worthy of forgiveness he knows he doesn't deserve. Do you believe him? "I don't know." Joan turned to face Marcus. "He cried, Marcus. Paul Howard, the man who threatened to destroy my family, stood in front of me and cried when he found out he had a son. Either he's become a completely different person, or he's the best manipulator I've ever encountered. What are you going to do?" "I don't know that either. But I keep thinking about Kevin. He deserves to know where he comes from. He deserves to have that choice available to him, even if I'm the one who has to decide when he's ready." "And your feelings?" Marcus asked gently. "Apart from what Kevin deserves, how are you processing all this?" Joan laughed humorlessly. "I'm not. I'm compartmentalizing like I always do and hoping the feelings stay in their boxes until I have time to deal with them." At home, Joan checked on Kevin, who was sleeping peacefully, his face soft and untroubled. She stood in his doorway for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of his chest, thinking about how much she had sacrificed to give him this safe, stable life. He looked so much like Paul. The same jaw, the same brow, the same way his forehead creased slightly when he was dreaming. Joan had always seen it, but tonight the resemblance felt sharper, more insistent. "What are you dreaming about, baby?" she whispered. "What questions are you going to ask me when you wake up?" She didn't sleep much that night. Kept replaying the conversation with Paul, analyzing his words for hidden agendas, his expressions for signs of manipulation. By morning, she was exhausted but no closer to a decision. The first letter arrived a week later. It was handwritten, carefully composed, asking nothing except to know how she was doing. No demands, no pressure, just simple words on expensive paper. "Joan, I don't expect you to respond to this. I just wanted you to know that I meant what I said. I'm willing to wait as long as it takes for you to decide whether I can be part of Kevin's life. In the meantime, I hope you're well. I hope he's well. I think about both of you every day." She almost threw it away. But something stopped her. Maybe curiosity, maybe the same instinct that had made her open that first invitation instead of burning it. She put the letter in a drawer instead. The second letter arrived 2 weeks later. This one contained a receipt showing a charitable donation in Kevin's name to a children's literacy program. The third letter included a photograph of Paul at a hospital, sitting in a rocking chair with a tiny infant in his arms. The caption on the back read, "This is Marcus. He was born with a heart condition like mine. I hold him every Tuesday because his mother has to work and can't be here during the day. It helps him, somehow. The nurses say babies need to be held to thrive. I wonder how many things I miss because I was too focused on thriving in all the wrong ways." Joan stared at the photograph for a long time. This wasn't manipulation. It couldn't be. Paul Howard didn't volunteer at hospitals and write heartfelt letters and donate to children's charities as part of some elaborate scheme to win her back. This was something else entirely. This was a man genuinely trying to become someone different. Or at least, she thought, finally putting the photograph down, it was a man who wanted her to believe he was trying. 3 months after the gala, Joan found herself picking up the phone. "Hello." Paul's voice was cautious, surprised. "It's Joan." Silence. Then, "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know. I wasn't sure I'd call. But I've been getting your letters. I hope that's okay. I wasn't trying to pressure you. I just needed you to know I was serious about changing." "I believe you're trying," Joan said slowly. "I'm not ready to say I believe you've succeeded. But I think maybe we should talk. Really talk, not like that night at the gala when everything was too raw. I'd like that. Whatever you need, whenever you're ready. There's a park near my house. Neutral territory. Can you come to Seattle next weekend? I'll be there." Joan hung up and stood in her kitchen, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step towards something that might heal wounds she'd thought would never close. Kevin wandered in, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Who was on the phone, Mom? Just someone I used to know, sweetheart. Someone who wants to meet you. Kevin's eyes widened. Is it my dad? The question hit Joan like a physical blow. She'd been so careful never to mention Paul, never to give Kevin details that might lead him to ask these questions. But children were perceptive. They listened at doors and noticed expressions and pieced together fragments of adult conversations into surprisingly accurate pictures. Why would you ask that? She managed. Kevin shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a 7-year-old trying to seem older than his years. You never talk about him. But sometimes you look at old pictures and get sad. And you just looked at your phone like it was something important and scary at the same time. So I figured maybe it was him. You are way too smart for 7 years old. I know. Kevin grinned, then turned serious again. Is it him, Mom? Is my dad coming to meet me? Joan knelt down so she was at his eye level. Yes, baby. But I need you to understand something first. Your dad and I had problems a long time ago. He wasn't ready to be a father when you were born, and that's why he hasn't been in your life. But he says he's changed. He says he wants to meet you, to get to know you. And I need to decide if that's safe. Safe from what? Kevin's brow furrowed. Is he dangerous? Not dangerous exactly. But sometimes people make promises they don't keep. Sometimes they say they've changed when they really haven't. I need to make sure he's going to be good for you before I let him into our life. Kevin considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing evidence. Can I help you decide? He asked finally. What do you mean? I mean, can I meet him and see for myself if he's good? I'm pretty good at telling when people are faking. Joan felt tears prick her eyes. You are good at that, she admitted. Okay. We'll meet him together. And if either of us gets a bad feeling, we leave. Deal? Deal. Joan hugged him tight, marveling at the strange courage of children. He was about to meet the father who had once wanted him erased from existence, and his main concern was whether he could help his mother make a good decision. Maybe she'd done something right after all. The following weekend, Paul arrived in Seattle. He texted Joan from his hotel, then from his rental car, then from the parking lot of the park she'd specified. Each message was careful, respectful, giving her complete control over the pace and nature of their meeting. I'm here whenever you're ready. No pressure. Take your time. Joan read the message, looked at Kevin, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy, and took a deep breath. Ready? She asked. Ready, Kevin confirmed. They walked to the park together, Kevin's small hand warm in hers. Paul was waiting on a bench near the duck pond, looking more nervous than Joan had ever seen him. He stood when he spotted them approaching, and she watched his face as he got his first real look at his son. 7 years old. Dark curly hair that needed cutting. Storm gray eyes that missed nothing. A slight frame that vibrated with barely contained energy. Paul's expression cycled through shock, wonder, grief, and something that looked like love, all in the space of a few seconds. Hi, Kevin said, approaching with the directness children wielded like a superpower. Are you my dad? Paul glanced at Joan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, Paul said, his voice rough. I am. Kevin studied him with the same analytical attention his mother used when evaluating a business proposal. You don't look like a bad guy, Kevin observed. Mom said you weren't ready to be a dad before. Are you ready now? I'm trying to be, Paul admitted. I made a lot of mistakes. I hurt your mom very badly. But I'm trying to learn how to be better. Kevin nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Do you like space? He asked abruptly. I'm going to be an astronaut when I grow up. Or maybe an astronomer. Someone who studies stars, anyway. I think space is fascinating, Paul said, visibly struggling to keep his emotions under control. Did you know there's a comet visible next month? I could bring a telescope when I visit. If you'd like me to visit again. Kevin's face lit up. Can you? He looked to Joan for permission. Mom, can he come back with a telescope? Joan felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not quite. But something adjacent. The beginning of believing that broken things might occasionally be rebuilt. We'll see how today goes first, she said carefully. But if you're comfortable with it, we can talk about future visits. The afternoon unfolded in ways Joan hadn't anticipated. Paul didn't try to buy Kevin's affection with promises of gifts or exciting adventures. He simply listened. When Kevin talked about constellations, Paul asked follow-up questions that proved he was actually paying attention. When Kevin demonstrated his knowledge of planetary orbits, Paul seemed genuinely impressed rather than condescendingly indulgent. By the time they stopped for ice cream, Kevin was chattering happily about his school science project and his best friend Miguel and the elaborate space station he was building out of cardboard boxes in the garage. "You're pretty good at listening," Kevin observed while attacking his mint chip ice cream. "Most grown-ups just pretend to listen but they're really thinking about other stuff." "I've had a lot of practice learning to pay attention," Paul said. "I used to be very bad at it. I missed important things because I was too focused on things that didn't matter." "Like what kind of things?" "Like work. Money. What other people thought of me." Paul glanced at Joan, then back at Kevin. "I was so busy trying to be successful that I forgot to be good. And it cost me the people who mattered most." Kevin processed this with visible thoughtfulness. "That's pretty dumb," he said finally. Paul actually laughed. "Yeah. It really was. But you're trying to be better now?" "Every day." Kevin nodded, scooping up the last of his ice cream. "Okay. I think you can come back with the telescope." Joan watched this exchange with a complicated mix of emotions. Pride in her son's perception and directness. Cautious hope that maybe, possibly, this could work. And underneath it all, a terror she couldn't quite name. Because letting Paul into Kevin's life meant letting him into her life too, at least peripherally. It meant lowering walls she had spent 8 years building. But maybe Marcus was right. Maybe those walls weren't just keeping Paul out. Maybe they were keeping her trapped inside. The afternoon ended at the park entrance. Kevin hugged Paul goodbye without hesitation, which surprised everyone, probably Kevin most of all. "See you soon," Kevin said. "I'll call before I come back," Paul promised. "With the telescope." After Kevin ran ahead to the car, Paul turned to Joan. "Thank you. For today. For giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet." Joan kept her voice neutral even as something shifted inside her chest. "This is about Kevin, not about you. If you mess this up, if you let him down, you'll never get another opportunity." "I won't. I promise. You promised me things before. Your promises didn't mean much then." Paul absorbed the blow without flinching. "I know. I know I destroyed your trust. I know sorry doesn't begin to cover what I did to you. But Joan, I'm not asking you to forgive me or give me another chance with you. I'm just asking for the opportunity to be a father to Kevin. I'll prove myself through actions, not words." "See that you do," Joan said, and walked away without looking back. That night, after Kevin was asleep, Joan sat in her kitchen staring at nothing, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Her phone buzzed. A text from Paul. "Thank you again for today. Kevin is incredible. You've raised him beautifully. I'll prove worthy of this chance. I promise." Joan stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "Actions, not words. See you next month." Short. Professional. Giving nothing away about the complicated tangle of emotions she was working very hard not to examine too closely. But somewhere beneath all those walls, something that might have been hope had started to grow. And Joan, for the first time in 8 years, wasn't sure whether that terrified her or set her free. "Now, if you've made it this far, I need you to do something for me. This story isn't over. In fact, we're just getting started. What happens next will test everything Joan believes about forgiveness and second chances. It will challenge Paul to prove whether his transformation is real or just another performance. And it will ask the hardest question of all, can the man who once tried to destroy a family become the one who helps put it back together?" If you want to see how this story ends, subscribe to Mr. Dawson's Stories right now and turn on those notifications. Hit that like button to let me know this story is resonating with you. And drop a comment telling me what you think Joan should do. Should she give Paul another chance, or are some betrayals simply unforgivable? The weeks that followed that first meeting in the park unfolded in ways Joan hadn't anticipated. She had expected Paul to fade, the way men often did when the reality of commitment replaced the romance of intention. She had expected excuses about work and travel and the demands of running a company worth billions. She had prepared herself for disappointment because preparing for disappointment was how she had survived the past 8 years. But Paul didn't fade. He called Kevin twice a week, conversations that started awkward and stilted but gradually became something else. Something that sounded almost like genuine connection. Joan listened from the kitchen while Kevin sprawled on the living room couch, describing his school day in elaborate detail while Paul apparently listened to every word. And then Miguel said that Pluto isn't a planet anymore, but I said it totally counts because it used to be a planet and you can't just decide something isn't a planet after everyone already learned it was one. Kevin's voice carried the passionate indignation of a 7-year-old confronting cosmic injustice. I think you make an excellent point. Paul's voice came through the phone speaker, clear enough for Joan to hear. There's actually a big debate among astronomers about whether Pluto should be reclassified. Some scientists agree with you completely. See? Kevin shot a triumphant look toward the kitchen. Dad says I'm right. Dad. The word hit Joan like a physical force. It was the first time Kevin had used it so casually, so naturally, like it was just a fact rather than a decision. She gripped the edge of the counter and reminded herself to breathe. After Kevin hung up, he wandered into the kitchen with the satisfied expression of someone who had just won an important argument. Dad knows a lot about space, he announced. He said next time he visits, he's going to bring books about the solar system debate. That sounds nice, Joan managed. Are you okay, Mom? You look weird again. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. About Dad? About everything. Kevin studied her with that unsettling perception that sometimes made her wonder if he could read minds. I think he's trying really hard, Kevin said finally. To be good, I mean. You can tell when someone's trying hard versus when they're just pretending. How can you tell? Pretending people get bored and stop paying attention. Trying people keep paying attention even when it's hard. Dad keeps paying attention. Out of the mouths of children, Joan thought. Sometimes they saw more clearly than adults ever could. The telescope arrived 3 weeks later, hand-delivered by Paul himself. It wasn't ostentatious, wasn't the most expensive model available, but it was high quality and came with a star chart and a guidebook specifically designed for beginners. I did some research, Paul explained as Kevin examined the equipment with barely contained excitement. This model is good for someone just starting out, but it's sophisticated enough to grow with you. If you decide you're really serious about astronomy, we can upgrade later. This is amazing, Kevin breathed. Can we use it tonight? If your mom says it's okay and the sky is clear enough. Kevin turned to Joan with the pleading expression that had successfully negotiated later bedtimes and extra desserts for years. Please, Mom. Please please please. Joan looked at Paul, who was carefully not pressuring, not inserting himself, just waiting for her decision. Okay, she said. But you have homework first. Kevin whooped and raced upstairs with his star chart, leaving Joan and Paul alone in the living room. Thank you, Paul said quietly. For letting me do this. It's for Kevin, not for you. I know. But thank you anyway. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Joan found herself studying Paul's face, looking for signs of the man she remembered. The arrogance. The casual cruelty. The way he had once looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. She didn't see any of it. What she saw instead was someone who looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Someone who watched her with something like hope but expected nothing in return. Someone who seemed genuinely grateful for every small permission she granted. How are you feeling? She asked, surprising herself with the question. The heart thing. Paul seemed equally surprised. Good days and bad days. The medication helps. I'm following all the protocols, seeing specialists, doing everything I can to extend whatever time I have left. Is it getting worse? Slowly. But I'm managing it. I want to be here as long as possible. Paul paused. For Kevin. And for whatever version of being present you'll allow. Joan didn't know how to respond to that. She had spent so long hating him, so long building walls against any possibility of connection, that genuine kindness felt like a foreign language she had forgotten how to speak. Homework, she said finally. Then dinner. Then telescope. That's the schedule. I'll make myself useful in the kitchen. You cook. Paul smiled slightly. I learned. 8 years is a long time to eat takeout alone. That evening became a memory that Joan would return to often in the months that followed. Kevin did his homework with unusual focus, motivated by the promise of stargazing. Paul made dinner, simple pasta with a sauce that suggested he had indeed learned to cook during his years of solitude. And after the dishes were done, the three of them bundled up and went to the backyard to look at the sky. There's Orion, Kevin announced, consulting his star chart. The hunter. See the 3 stars in a row? That's his belt. Perfect, Paul said, adjusting the telescope. Let's see if we can get a closer look at the Orion Nebula. It's just below the belt. Joan stood slightly apart, watching them work together to aim the telescope. Paul was patient in a way she hadn't expected, letting Kevin make adjustments even when it would have been faster to do it himself. When Kevin finally found the nebula and gasped with genuine wonder, Paul's face transformed with joy that seemed completely unguarded. "Mom, look." Kevin waved her over. "It's so beautiful." Joan bent to the eyepiece and saw the nebula for the first time. Swirls of light and color, impossibly far away, impossibly beautiful. "That's amazing," she admitted. "It's a stellar nursery," Kevin explained, clearly quoting something he had read. "Stars are being born in there right now. Isn't that cool?" "Very cool." They stayed outside until Kevin started yawning, despite his protests that he wasn't tired. Paul helped pack up the telescope while Joan shepherded Kevin toward bed. "Can Dad stay?" Kevin asked as Joan tucked him in. "Like for a sleepover?" "Dad has a hotel room, sweetheart. This isn't really his home. But it could be." Kevin's voice was drowsy but determined. "Couldn't it? If you wanted it to be." "It's complicated, baby. You always say that when the answer is yes but you don't want to admit it." Joan laughed despite herself. "Go to sleep, you impossible child. Love you, Mom. Love you too." She found Paul in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean. "He asked if you could stay," she said. "For a sleepover." Paul's hand stilled. "What did you tell him?" "That it's complicated." Paul turned to face her. "Joan, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to try to win you back. I'm not hoping that spending time with Kevin will somehow lead to us getting back together. I know I destroyed any chance of that 8 years ago. I'm just grateful for whatever access you'll give me to his life. And if Kevin keeps asking questions like that, then we answer them honestly. That his parents care about him but have their own complicated history. That love doesn't always look like the movies. That family can take many different forms." Joan leaned against the counter, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with the late hour. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I spent 8 years building a life that didn't include you. Learning to be complete without anyone else. And now you're here, and Kevin wants you here, and I don't know where that leaves me." "It leaves you exactly where you've always been," Paul said gently. "In control. You set the pace, the boundaries, the rules. I'll follow whatever you decide because you've earned that right and I've earned the consequences of my choices." "That sounds very practiced." "It is." Paul smiled ruefully. 6 years of therapy. You learn to articulate things. 6 years. That's a long time. Not long enough to undo what I did. But long enough to understand why I did it and commit to never doing it again. Joan studied him, looking for cracks in the presentation. "What did your therapist say?" "About me, about Kevin, about all of this." "She said I needed to focus on becoming someone worthy of connection without expecting connection in return. She said the goal couldn't be winning you back because that was just another form of manipulation. The goal had to be transformation for its own sake. And you believe you've transformed?" "I believe I'm different than I was. Better in some ways. Still broken in others." Paul paused. "But I'm not the man who threatened you 8 years ago. That man was so terrified of vulnerability that he tried to destroy anything that made him feel it. I've learned to be vulnerable without it destroying me." Joan wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could be performance rather than genuine change. But something in his voice, something in the way he stood there making no demands, asking for nothing, simply present and accountable, made arguing feel pointless. "It's late," she said finally. "You should get back to your hotel. I'll see you tomorrow. For breakfast before my flight. If Kevin wants that, yes." Paul nodded and moved toward the door. "Thank you, Joan. For today. For the telescope. For letting me be here." He left without waiting for a response. Joan stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of an evening she hadn't expected. Pasta sauce residue in the sink. A star chart left on the table. The faint outline of her son's excitement still hanging in the air. "What am I doing?" she asked the empty room. The room, predictably, offered no answers. "Now, before I continue with the next chapter of this journey, I need to pause and acknowledge something. What you're witnessing is rare. It's the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding trust that was shattered into a million pieces. Paul isn't trying to rush it. Joan isn't ready to forgive. But somewhere in the space between them, something fragile is beginning to grow. If you've ever watched someone prove they've changed, if you've ever wondered whether second chances are naive or courageous, this story is speaking directly to your experience. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because Mr. Dawson's Stories understands that the most important transformations happen gradually, one choice at a time. The months that followed established a rhythm that Joan gradually stopped fighting. Paul visited Seattle twice a month, every visit more comfortable than the last. He stayed at the same hotel, arrived at the same time, followed the same pattern of asking permission before doing anything that might cross a boundary. He took Kevin to science museums and planetariums. He showed up for school events, sitting in the back, never presuming to take a place beside Joan in the parent section. He learned the names of Kevin's friends, his teachers, his favorite foods, his inexplicable hatred of anything orange-flavored. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Joan felt her walls beginning to soften. It started with small things. She stopped tensing when Paul walked into the room. She started including him in dinner plans without making it feel like a concession. She caught herself laughing at something he said and didn't immediately feel guilty about it. One evening, 5 months after that first meeting in the park, Joan and Paul sat on her back porch while Kevin finished homework upstairs. The Seattle summer had finally arrived, warm and golden, and the yard was filled with the sounds of neighborhood children playing. "He's happy," Paul observed. "Kevin, I mean. You can tell just by looking at him that he feels secure." "He's always been happy," Joan said. "I made sure of that." "I know. And I want you to know that I see it. I see everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed, everything you've built to give him that stability. I'm not trying to take credit for any of it." Joan was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you fight for us?" she asked finally. "Back then, I mean. When I told you I was pregnant, you could have chosen differently. You could have been scared but still chosen to be present. Why didn't you?" Paul stared at the yard, his expression distant. "Because I was a coward." The simplest answer and the truest one. I had been raised to believe that control was everything. My father ran his company like a dictator and his family the same way. Emotions were weakness. Vulnerability was failure. When you told me you were pregnant, I felt completely out of control for the first time in my life. And threatening me gave you back control. Yes. Paul's voice was thick with self-contempt. I couldn't control the pregnancy, but I could control you. Or I thought I could. I never imagined you'd actually leave. What did you think would happen? I thought you'd agree. Get the abortion. Stay. Let me keep pretending everything was fine. Paul shook his head. I was so convinced of my own power that I couldn't imagine someone choosing anything other than what I wanted. And when I left, I told myself it was for the best. That you'd made your choice and I was free of a complication I never wanted. I went back to work, back to building my empire, back to the life that made sense to me. But it was empty. Paul turned to face her. Every success felt hollow. Every milestone felt meaningless. I had everything I thought I wanted and none of it mattered because I had traded my soul to get it. Joan processed this in silence. When did you start therapy? 2 years after you left. I had what I now know was a breakdown. Panic attacks, insomnia, this overwhelming sense that something was fundamentally wrong with me. My doctor suggested I talk to someone, and I resisted for months because therapy was weakness and weakness was unacceptable. What changed? Paul laughed humorlessly. I had a panic attack in a board meeting. In front of my entire executive team. Couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, completely fell apart in front of people I'd spent years convincing that I was invincible. That sounds terrifying. It was. But it was also liberating. Once my mask cracked publicly, there was no point pretending anymore. I finally admitted I needed help. And the therapist helped you understand what you'd done to me? She helped me understand why I did it. The patterns I'd inherited. The defenses I'd built. The way I had confused control for connection and power for love. It took years to unpick all of it. I'm still unpicking it. Joan felt something shift inside her, some frozen place beginning to thaw. I wanted to hate you forever, she said quietly. It was easier that way. If you were simply a monster, I didn't have to grapple with the fact that I had loved a monster. I didn't have to question my own judgment. And now? Now I don't know what you are. Monster doesn't fit anymore. But forgiven doesn't fit either. You're somewhere in between. I can live with in between, Paul said. It's more than I deserve. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, they could hear Kevin singing something off-key while he worked on homework, his voice carrying through the open window. He's tone-deaf, Joan observed. Completely. Paul grinned. I was the same at his age. My mother used to say I could make a professional choir sound like a car crash. I didn't know that about you. There's a lot you didn't know. A lot I didn't let you know. I was so busy being impressive that I never let you see the real me. Is this the real you? More real than anything you saw 8 years ago. Paul met her eyes. I'm trying, Joan. Every day, I'm trying to be someone worthy of the second chance you've given me with Kevin. The conversation stayed with Joan long after Paul returned to his hotel. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. 8 years ago, she had thought she knew him. Thought she understood the man she was building a life with. But she had known only the surface, the curated version he showed the world. The real Paul, the broken, terrified, deeply human Paul, had been hidden behind walls as thick as the ones she had built herself. Maybe they weren't so different after all. The thought was unsettling and somehow comforting at the same time. Summer faded into autumn, and the rhythm of their unusual family continued. Kevin's 8th birthday approached, and for the first time, Joan faced a question she hadn't anticipated. Mom. Kevin looked up from his breakfast cereal. Can Dad come to my birthday party? Of course. He always comes to your important events. No, I mean really come. Like, be there the whole time. Help with the decorations. Meet my friends. Kevin paused. Be there like a real dad. Joan set down her coffee cup. What do you mean, a real dad? Like Miguel's dad. He's always at Miguel's parties, helping with games and stuff. I want Dad to do that at my party. The request was simple, logical, entirely reasonable. And it represented a shift that Joan hadn't quite prepared for. I'll talk to him, she said carefully. See if his schedule allows it. Kevin's face lit up. Really? You'd ask him? I'm not promising anything. But I'll ask. You're the best, Mom. The phone call with Paul that evening was longer than usual. He wants you at his birthday party, Joan explained. Not just as a guest. He wants you to help with decorations, run games, be visible as his father in front of his friends. Paul was quiet for a moment. And how do you feel about that? Conflicted. Joan admitted. It's a big step. Having you publicly present as his father to people in our community. If it's too much, I can just attend as a guest. Or not come at all. Whatever makes you comfortable. That's just it. Joan sighed. It's not about my comfort anymore. Kevin has a right to a father who's present. A father who shows up visibly and consistently. I've been protecting him from that because I was protecting myself, but he's asking for more, and I don't think I have the right to say no. So what do you want to do? I want you to come. To help with decorations. To run games. To be there as his father. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Joan wondered if the call had dropped. Thank you, Paul finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I won't let him down. I promise. The birthday party became a turning point that neither of them had anticipated. Paul arrived the night before, helping Joan blow up balloons and hang streamers in the backyard while Kevin supervised with the intensity of a general overseeing a military operation. The blue ones need to be higher, Kevin instructed. And there should be more silver because silver is like stars. More silver, Paul agreed, climbing the ladder. You're the boss. Actually, Mom is the boss. Kevin considered this. But I'm the boss of my birthday. Fair enough. Joan watched them work together, father and son united in the serious business of party preparation. There was something natural about it, something that looked like it had always been this way rather than something they were all learning for the first time. 20 children descended on the backyard the next afternoon, armed with presents and sugar-fueled enthusiasm. Paul ran games with an energy that surprised Joan. He organized relay races and treasure hunts and a surprisingly competitive water balloon fight that left everyone, including himself, completely soaked. Your dad is cool, she overheard Miguel tell Kevin. I know, Kevin replied with obvious pride. He's really good at balloon tosses. After the party, when the last guest had been collected by their parents and the backyard looked like a glitter bomb had exploded, Joan and Paul collapsed into lawn chairs while Kevin sorted through his presents inside. I'm exhausted, Paul admitted. I don't know how you do this all the time. You get used to it. Joan smiled despite herself. But you did well. The kids loved you. I loved them. Paul looked at the mess surrounding them with satisfaction. I never understood the appeal of children's parties before. They seemed chaotic and pointless. But watching Kevin with his friends, seeing how happy he was. I get it now. What do you get? Why people do this? Why they sacrifice sleep and money and personal time for tiny humans who can't even tie their own shoes. It's not about what you get back. It's about what you get to witness. Joan felt something crack inside her chest, some final piece of resistance giving way. You've really changed, she said quietly. I keep looking for the man I knew 8 years ago, and I can't find him anymore. He's still in there somewhere. Paul turned to meet her eyes. But I've learned to keep him locked up. To make different choices even when the old patterns try to surface. What happens when the old patterns do surface? I call my therapist. Paul smiled wryly. Or I do the breathing exercises she taught me. Or I remove myself from the situation until I can respond rather than react. It's not perfect, but it works. That sounds like a lot of work. It is. Every day. But it's worth it. They sat in comfortable silence as the evening settled around them. Joan. Paul's voice was hesitant. Can I ask you something? Depends on what it is. What do you want? Not for Kevin. For yourself. What does Joan Hills want? The question caught her off guard. She spent so much time managing expectations and boundaries and the complicated logistics of co-parenting that she rarely stopped to consider her own desires. I don't know, she admitted. For 8 years, I wanted safety. Stability. Proof that I could build a life without anyone else. I got all of that. But Kevin asked me recently if I'm happy. And I realized I've been so focused on being content that I forgot to ask if content was enough. Is it? Joan looked at the darkening sky, at the first stars appearing above the Seattle skyline. No, she said finally. I don't think it is. What would be enough? Connection. Joan surprised herself with the answer. Real connection with someone who sees me completely and stays anyway. I had that once, or I thought I did, and losing it almost destroyed me. So I stopped wanting it. And now? Now I'm starting to wonder if the walls I built are keeping me safe or just keeping me lonely. Paul didn't respond immediately. When he spoke, his voice was careful. I don't have the right to ask for anything, Joan. I know that. But if you ever decide you want to try again, to see if we could build something real this time, I would spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that chance. The words hung in the air between them. That's a lot to promise, Joan said finally. It's the truth. Your truth has hurt me before. I know. And you have every right to be skeptical. All I can do is keep showing up, keep proving myself, and hope that eventually you'll believe I'm different. Joan stood, suddenly needing distance. It's getting late. Kevin will want to show you all his presents before bed. Of course. They walked inside together, the conversation unfinished but something new beginning to form in the space between them. Winter arrived with Seattle's characteristic gray persistence. Rain blanketed the city for weeks at a time, and Joan found herself looking forward to Paul's visits in ways she wasn't quite ready to examine. He had started staying longer. A weekend stretched to 4 days. 4 days became a week. Each visit, the goodbye became harder, not just for Kevin but for Joan as well. One evening in late January, with rain hammering against the windows and Kevin asleep upstairs, Joan made a decision. I've been thinking, she said, sitting across from Paul in her living room. About what you said at Kevin's birthday party. Paul set down his book, giving her his full attention. About what you want, he clarified. About all of it. Connection. Trust. The possibility of something more. And? Joan took a breath. I'm scared. I need you to know that. I'm scared that if I let you in, you'll hurt me again. That the man you become is just a phase, and eventually the old Paul will resurface when things get hard. That's fair. But I'm also scared of the alternative. Of spending the rest of my life behind walls because one person hurt me once. Of teaching Kevin that love isn't worth the risk because his mother was too afraid to try again. What are you saying, Joan? I'm saying that I think I'd like to find out if we could be something. Not jumping back into a relationship. Not pretending the past didn't happen. But trying. Slowly. With honesty and boundaries and the understanding that trust has to be rebuilt brick by brick. Paul's face underwent a transformation that Joan would remember for the rest of her life. Hope and fear and gratitude and love, all mixed together in an expression of pure vulnerability. I would like that more than anything, he said. Whatever pace you need. Whatever boundaries you set. I'm all in, Joan. I have been since the moment I saw Kevin for the first time and realized what I'd thrown away. This doesn't mean I forgive you, Joan clarified. Not completely. Not yet. I know. And if you hurt me again, if you hurt Kevin, there won't be a third chance. We'll disappear from your life forever. I understand. And we're not telling Kevin yet. Not until we're sure this is real. Whatever you decide. Joan studied him, looking for any sign of the old Paul. The manipulation. The control. The willingness to destroy what he couldn't dominate. She found none of it. Okay, she said finally. We'll try. The trying was harder than either of them anticipated. It started small. Dinners without Kevin, just the two of them learning who they had become in the years apart. Long conversations about everything they had never discussed before. The fears that drove them. The dreams they had abandoned. The ways their childhoods had shaped them into the adults they had become. Joan learned that Paul's father had been emotionally abusive, demanding perfection and punishing any sign of weakness with cutting criticism and withdrawn affection. She learned that Paul's mother, the only source of warmth in his childhood, had died just weeks before Joan told him she was pregnant. She learned that his cruel ultimatum had been delivered by a man in the grip of unprocessed grief and lifelong conditioning, neither of which excused his behavior but both of which explained it. Paul learned that Joan's childhood had been the opposite, warm and supportive and filled with love that made his threats against her family all the more devastating. He learned that leaving Boston had meant abandoning not just him but the safety net of family she had always taken for granted. He learned that her success had been built not just on talent but on the desperate need to prove that she could survive anything, that no one would ever have the power to destroy her again. If you are still watching this, if you have made it this far into Joan and Paul's story, then you understand something that not everyone grasps. You understand that redemption isn't a destination. It's a journey that never really ends. It's daily choices. Moment-by-moment decisions to be better than you were yesterday. Paul is making those choices. Joan is learning to trust them. And Kevin, the child who was never supposed to exist, is becoming the bridge that connects two people who lost each other and somehow found their way back. This is what Mr. Dawson's Stories is about. The messy, complicated, painful, beautiful work of becoming human together. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think about your own walls and whether they're protecting you or imprisoning you, I need you to do something. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is struggling to forgive. Someone who is trying to change. Someone who has lost hope that broken things can ever be made whole. And subscribe if you haven't already, because this is a community of people who believe that the hardest stories are the most worth telling. Now let me tell you what happened when Kevin asked the question that changed everything. It was a Sunday morning in early spring, almost a year since that first meeting in the park. Paul had stayed the weekend, sleeping in the guest room as he always did, maintaining the boundaries Joan had established. They were having breakfast together, the three of them, when Kevin set down his fork with unusual seriousness. I need to ask you both something, he said. Joan and Paul exchanged glances. Of course, sweetheart, Joan said. What is it? Why doesn't Dad live here? The question landed with the weight of something Kevin had been thinking about for a long time. Dad lives in Boston, Joan explained carefully. His company is there. But he's here all the time now, Kevin pressed. He was here for Christmas and New Year's and my birthday and almost every weekend since forever. Why doesn't he just stay? It's complicated, baby. You always say that when you don't want to tell me the real answer. Kevin's eyes moved between his parents. I'm 8 now. I can handle real answers. Paul leaned forward. You're right, he said. You deserve a real answer. The truth is, your mom and I are still figuring out what our family looks like. We hurt each other a long time ago, and we're still learning to trust each other again. But you love each other. Kevin stated this as fact, not question. I can tell. We care about each other very much, Joan said carefully. That's the same thing. Kevin rolled his eyes with the exasperation of someone explaining the obvious to the slow-witted. When you love someone, you want to be with them. Dad loves you and you love Dad and you both love me. So why are we living in 3 different places when we could all be in one? Joan felt tears threatening and blinked them back. What would you want? She asked. If you could choose. I want Dad to live here. Kevin's voice was certain. Or near here. Close enough that I don't have to miss him when he's gone. He turned to Paul. Would you move here if Mom said it was okay? Paul looked at Joan, asking permission even now. Yes, he said. In a heartbeat. Kevin turned back to Joan. So, Mom. Can Dad stay? The question hung in the air. Joan thought about 8 years of walls. 8 years of proving she didn't need anyone. 8 years of being complete unto herself, needing nothing, surviving everything. She thought about how tired she was of surviving. How ready she was to start living. She thought about the man sitting across from her who had spent nearly a decade becoming someone worthy of the trust she was terrified to give. Yes, she said. Dad can stay. Kevin's whoop of joy probably woke the neighbors. The transition happened faster than anyone expected. Paul flew back to Boston to handle the logistics of relocating his company's operations. He returned 2 weeks later with a real estate agent and started looking at properties within 10 minutes of Joan's house. Within a month, he had closed on a craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood, close enough for daily interaction but far enough to maintain the independence Joan still needed. The first night in his new house, Paul invited Kevin over to see his room. Joan watched from the doorway as her son explored the space that would become his when he stayed with his father. This is really mine. Kevin touched the desk position to catch morning light. Like, mine. Really yours. Paul smiled. We can decorate it however you want. Can I have glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling? Absolutely. And a telescope mount on the roof? We might need to talk to the homeowners association about that. But I'll look into it. Kevin threw his arms around Paul with the unself-conscious affection of a child who had never learned to guard his heart. I love you, Dad. Paul's eyes met Joan's over Kevin's head, shining with tears he didn't try to hide. I love you too, buddy. More than you'll ever know. The year that followed was the happiest of Joan's life. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't. Paul still had bad days when old patterns threatened to surface. Joan still had moments of fear when trust felt impossible. They argued about parenting decisions and household responsibilities and the 1,000 small conflicts that arise when two independent people try to merge their lives. But they worked through all of it. Talked about it. Sometimes yelled about it. Always came back to the table willing to try again. Kevin flourished in ways that made Joan realize how much he had needed this. A father who showed up. Parents who worked together. The stability of knowing he was loved from multiple directions. His science project won the district competition. His grades improved. His drawings, still obsessed with space and stars, became more sophisticated. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Joan stopped being afraid. It happened gradually, the way ice melts when spring comes. One day she looked at Paul across the dinner table and realized she wasn't waiting for him to hurt her anymore. She wasn't braced for betrayal. She was simply present with a man she had learned to love again, not despite his flaws but with full knowledge of them. That night, after Kevin was asleep, she found Paul in the kitchen doing dishes. I forgive you, she said. Paul went very still. What? I forgive you. For all of it. For the threats and the cruelty and the 8 years I spent raising Kevin alone. I forgive you. Paul turned to face her, his hands still wet, his expression raw with emotion. Joan. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't mean I've forgotten. But it means I'm not carrying it anymore. It means I'm choosing to put it down and move forward. Paul crossed the kitchen and took her hands in his. I don't deserve that, he said. I never expected it. I know. That's why I'm giving it to you. Because you didn't expect it. Because you've spent 2 years proving yourself without any guarantee that it would matter. Because the man you've become is someone worth forgiving. They stood there in the kitchen, hands intertwined, something new and fragile and beautiful growing in the space where pain used to live. I love you, Paul said. I loved you 8 years ago but I was too broken to know what that meant. I love you now with everything I've learned and everything I've become. I love you too. Joan smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile in a decade. Again. Still. For the first time. The proposal came 6 months later, on a night when the stars were unusually clear over Seattle. Paul took Joan and Kevin to a hilltop park with a view of the city spread out below them like a blanket of lights. He set up the telescope and let Kevin find constellations while he waited for the right moment. Finally, when Kevin was absorbed in tracking a satellite across the sky, Paul took Joan's hand and dropped to one knee. I had a whole speech prepared, he said, his voice shaking. About second chances and redemption and how you saved me when I didn't deserve saving. But looking at you now, all I can think to say is thank you. Thank you for Kevin. For letting me know him. For giving me the chance to become his father. Thank you for trusting me when every rational part of your brain said not to. Thank you for loving me even though I gave you every reason not to. Joan Hills, I spent the first half of my life building an empire. I want to spend the second half building a home with you. Will you marry me? Kevin had abandoned the telescope and was watching with barely contained excitement. Say yes, Mom, he whispered loudly. Joan laughed through her tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Kevin's cheer echoed across the hilltop as Paul slid the ring onto Joan's finger and kissed her under the stars. The wedding was small, held in the backyard of the house where they had first looked at constellations through a telescope. Marcus stood as Joan's witness. Kevin served as ring-bearer with the solemnity of someone handling nuclear launch codes. When Paul said "I do," his voice broke on the second word. When Joan said "I do," she felt something finally click into place. Not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new one. The reception was family only, Kevin holding court over the small gathering with stories about his parents that made everyone laugh. Remember when Dad tried to cook breakfast and set off all the smoke alarms? Remember when Mom got lost trying to find Dad's house even though she'd been there 100 times? Remember when you both thought I didn't know you were dating but I totally knew because you kept looking at each other all weird? Joan and Paul exchanged glances, caught out by their perceptive child. How long did you know? Joan asked. Forever, Kevin replied with 8-year-old confidence. You guys are really obvious. Later, after the guests had left and Kevin was finally asleep despite his protests that wedding days didn't require bedtimes, Joan and Paul stood on their back porch looking at the stars. We made it, Paul said. Against all odds. We made it, Joan agreed. But you know this is just the beginning. Marriage is hard. Life is hard. There will be days when we want to give up. I know. But there's no version of hard that's worse than the emptiness of the life I was living before. No challenge that isn't worth facing together. Joan leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. 8 years ago, you told me to get rid of our baby or you'd destroy my family. Look at us now. Kevin. This house. This life. I was wrong about everything, Paul said. The destruction I threatened would have been my own. Losing you both is what almost destroyed me. Finding my way back is what saved me. Joan turned to face him. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when things get hard, and they will, you won't run. You won't shut down. You won't become the man you used to be. I promise, Paul said. And if I start to slip, tell me. Don't let me hide behind walls again. Deal. They kissed under the stars, two people who had lost each other and found their way back. Two people who had learned that redemption was possible if you were willing to do the work. Two people who had built a family from the rubble of their mistakes. Inside, Kevin slept peacefully, dreaming of stars and telescopes and the life that stretched ahead of him. Outside, the universe continued its ancient dance, indifferent to human stories but somehow containing all of them. Every love and every loss. Every betrayal and every forgiveness. Every ending that was secretly a beginning. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with something better. With honestly ever after. With work and commitment and the daily choice to love even when it's hard. Joan and Paul Howard didn't get a fairy tale. They got something more valuable. They got reality, with all its complications and challenges and unexpected joys. And in the end, that was more than enough. This story began with a threat. Get rid of that baby, or I'll destroy your family. But it ends with a family that refused to be destroyed. A mother who built an empire while raising a child alone. A father who spent 8 years becoming worthy of the second chance he didn't deserve. A son who saw his parents more clearly than they saw themselves. If you have stayed with me through this entire journey, you understand something important. You understand that people can change. That forgiveness is possible. That the worst moments of our lives don't have to define us forever. You understand that redemption is not a single moment of transformation but 1,000 daily choices to be better than we were yesterday. You understand that love, real love, the kind that survives betrayal and rebuilds from rubble, is the most powerful force in the universe. I want to thank you for being part of the Mr. Dawson Stories community. This is what we do here. We tell stories about messy, complicated, beautifully imperfect human beings who somehow find their way to each other despite everything working against them. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has lost hope. Someone who is trying to change. Someone who wonders if broken things can ever truly be made whole. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories coming. More tales of love and loss and the long road to redemption. And remember this, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you, tomorrow is a new day. A new chance. A new opportunity to write a different ending. Your story isn't over yet. Until next time, this is Mr. Dawson Stories, reminding you that the most powerful words in any language are these: I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. May you find someone who says those words to you. And may you become the kind of person who means them when you say them back.